Thank you so much, Carl, for being here. I want to introduce you for the audience. Our guest expert speaker is Carl Dalhammar. He's an associate professor at the International Institute for Industrial Environmental Economics at Lund University. He's also a member of the Council for Research Issues at the Swedish Competition Authority. It's really a pleasure to have you with us for this interview, Carl. And we're really glad to know some of your impressions and your opinions about the innovation, how circular economy and Industry 4.0 was the diagnosis of the current state of the situation, and what are also the perspectives. So we're going to do the interview has been organized with 5 questions, open questions, of course. And the first 2 questions are more like knowing a little bit about the diagnosis of the current situation. What are the challenges, the current challenges? What are also the drivers? And the 3 last questions are more related about the perspectives. What could we do, and what are the responsibles for doing what? So let's start. Thank you again,
thanks for
Carl,
the invitation. Thanks for the invitation. Okay.
I wanna start with the first question. It's how would you assess the current state of the industrial innovation and the circular economy transition in Europe, and most specifically in Sweden, if you have some examples?
You could say that, generally speaking, we're a couple of decades behind climate change. So the industry is ahead on climate change. They're all moving towards scope 1, 2, and 3. Also, when it comes to the financial industry, they're a bit further ahead on climate and so on. So the circular economy is catching up. And you see this also in industrial maturity. They are not as, most companies are not as far ahead as they are in climate issues. And but of course, there are some leading the pack. Some are born circular, new companies coming up, remanufacturing, and others, or circular sharing economy companies. And then you have others catching up. But I would say, when it comes to big companies, it's a big change, and there's a lot of barriers. Could be waste legislation, make it hard to reuse, remanufacture. There could be industrial, the accounting practices, making it hard to lease out stuff. We find lots of different barriers. Just to take an example that no one researches, the electricity grid is throwing away stuff that works after 30 years, even if it works, because that's how the capital rules are made. So you throw away stuff and so on. So depending on the industry, we find that they're still quite immature, and it's a big process to change. But of course, some big corporations have started with some interesting practices, like functional sales, selling functions, or battery as a service using electric vehicles in the mining industry, stuff like that. When it comes to Sweden, the big companies are very interested and have some interesting practices. The Swedish small and medium-sized industries are, generally speaking, quite far ahead in sustainability issues. There's a lot of effort to educate them and the circular options right now, and what kind of options they have to go circular. And there it's a big difference between small and medium-sized companies that deliver to the public sector or to bigger companies, because they will have more pressure on to deliver circular solutions. And then we have to remember that it depends also on the type of industry. You know, your circular strategies depend on what you sell to consumers. If you sell a certain type of product, let's say you sell a disposable product with a short life, well, then you can often, sometimes you can replace it with a longer lived multiple use product, but often it's rather that you cannot, so you have to go for maybe bio-based materials or something like that. Whereas if you instead sell something long-lived to your customers, you may go for remanufacturing or go for functional sales or something. So yeah.
Would you say, Carl, that aside from the lifespan, we'll need to follow a double strategy, matching business strategies, but also public regulations in order to achieve this transition?
I mean, it doesn't matter if you talk about climate change or circular economy. Without strong regulation, nothing will happen. And you see that very clearly now in my area of research, product regulation. The policymakers in Europe or in France and so on, they are more and more saying, we're going to do the choice editing for you. We don't think consumers can drive this change. So we're going to choice edit. The products of the futures are going to be energy efficient, free of chemicals. They're going to be high quality and longer lived. You have to provide information on durability, commercial warranties. You have to provide upgrades, spare parts to independent repairers. You know, we are like regulating you guys. Mm-hmm. So we're if you can't deliver this, you're out of the market. So that's one thing. The other, so yes, you're not going to get a circular economy without regulation, but it's also about removing old barriers that exist today. For instance, the recycling industry complains that, you know, you can deliver the same material as the mining industry, but you still have different standards depending on if it's recycled material or virgin material. And you can even talk to them here in Sweden. They say, we're allowed to do this recycling in one city, but not in the other city. So they're dependent on the local regulations. So it's both about, yes, we need new regulations, but also we need to remove the older regulations. The waste hierarchy is a typical example that often leads to in the wrong direction and stuff like that.
That drives to the second question, that it's also part of kind of diagnosis of the current situation. What do you consider that will be the current challenges in circular economy in Europe and the upcoming challenges?
There are many challenges, and almost too many to mention, but to name a few examples, business to business, it can go a little bit quicker. With some circular solutions that also save money and resources. Consumers is a big problem. We have geared consumers into a throwaway society. We don't even use certain parts before we throw them away. We purchase stuff and we use them a little bit, throw them away. So that's one big barrier. Consumers need to think differently. We need to change consumer behavior. We need to change waste legislation, as I said, so we can not stop circular solutions like remanufacturing and recycling. We have also other mindset issues that are problematic. One is that we want consumers to share or lease things, but it's very hard to do that. It's easier in business to business. Another mindset problem that we have, I think, which also is problematic for us researchers, is that we put a lot of effort into circular business models without potential. You know, there's a lot of circular business models, but only some of them have potential. A lot of them have very limited environmental potential, and it's a tendency also among researchers to not be critical enough, and also policymakers, they are just happy, you know, show us some circular business models, but some of them, it's useless to invest heavily in those because they have no potential, whereas others have a huge potential. One example is reconditioning of furniture. It's a big market in Sweden now. Both private companies and the public sector can sell buy reconditioned high quality furniture. You can get them for half the price with similar quality as new, right? It's enormous potential, and you buy hundreds of thousands of these per year. So in the public sector. So I mean, it's an enormous potential in some of these, and like IT stuff, prolonging lifetime, high vehicle remanufacturing, stuff like that. It's a high potential. And then we see some other circular business model where the potential is small and often also uncertain. We have an example. I give you one example. We have a company providing their own material for houses, and they say we can recycle this stuff. It's a mix of a natural synthetic material and a natural material, and they say we can recycle this almost 100% many times. But then the question comes, what if this company is not on the market in 25 years or 50 years, so they're not there to recycle it? Then we're just stuck with the nasty material, right? So we have to be careful so we don't steer into suboptimal solutions. It's better to steer away from nasty materials than maybe prescribing this. And then a final thing to bring up is public procurement. You know, sometimes they say, you know, Argentina is the country of the future, and it always will be, you know. It's the same with public procurement. It has enormous potential, and maybe it will always have enormous potential, but to realize that potential requires a lot of leadership, courage, challenging norms and stuff like that. So those are some of the barriers, I see.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned this kind of barrier that it's ensuring the continuity of some of the circularity business model, and this drives us to the third question: what are those skill sets, hard and soft, that you consider like critical or necessary to drive a successful transition and implementation of circular economy initiatives? Who will be the responsible for doing or taking charge of this upgrading of skills? Public authorities, private entities, or businesses?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the key thing, whether you talk about, you know, skills in government or companies, is that it's not about the circular but sustainable transition, right? So in the past, we used to put our efforts on the climate and forget about materials. Now it's a risk we put everything on circularity, forget about climate, so, or chemicals. So first of all, you need to have a holistic view of these things and deal with them together. And then from the policymaking side, it's of course important that you know a little bit about the industries and their problems. Too often policymakers don't bother to learn about the real life problems of industries. We interview a lot of industries, and so we get a feeling for their problems. And that's also relates back a little to the nature of policymaking. You know, you show nice policies, but as a political scorecard, right? Okay. And France is an example of this. You're from France, and they are leading the way, you know, with many of these criminalizing planned obsolescence, this mandatory repair index, but they don't always implement stuff, you know. So, you know, so they have a nice policies, but sometimes you wish we haven't seen you evaluate them or implement, you know. So sometimes you're feeling we show something nice, we leave it to the consumers. And it's not a critique against France specifically, because this is very common, you know, in many places. So really learning the issues and dare to take the hard decisions to get forward. When it comes to industry, it's a little bit complicated. It's not easy to give an answer. If you look at a big company, it's so big that it's hard to change. So you need the mediators who can get people to communicate to each other. Sometimes when our students work in big companies, you realize it's only our students that connect some of these people. They have never talked to each other, right? Within the same company. So that is, of course, one thing to have. When it comes to smaller companies, we have some research going on. I mean, they are experts in their markets, and they need a little bit of coaching to look at circular opportunities. And it's important then that they might be experts on what they do, but they need someone with a good sustainability knowledge to support them in their changes. But so this is a general answer. Who has the responsibility? I mean, it's a little bit different. Big industries, of course, can educate themselves. It's about cooperation networks. Smaller companies, at least in Sweden, have a lot of support from the public agency who also subsidize, consultancies and so on to support them. But it's hard to get an overview because even in Sweden, I mean, we only have 10 million people, but every region does their own thing. So
Yeah.
it's hard to.
Yeah, it's hard to find the good balance, the middle point in between the centralization and the freedom that gives small companies. But going to the fourth question, that it's also linked with the topic we are now discussing of public policies. What's the role of these public policies in the circularity transition? Are they enabled to facilitate this transition? And what's the impact of this in the European value chains?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big question, but to take my area now, product regulation, Europe is very much leading. China wanted to lead a few years back, but Europe has like re-emerged as the leader of regulating products, chemicals, and also in standardization, generally speaking, not just regulation, but standardization. And in that sense, it's well proven, for instance, by this book, The Brussels Effect by Anna Bradford, that companies around the world are very much using European regulation as a benchmark. So in that sense, if we take Europe as the stage, we can influence quite a lot through Brussels and regulations there. And that means that the member states can influence Brussels, who can later influence the world in a way. On the other hand, it's also then important that we, for instance, in standardization, that we cooperate with other jurisdictions, so we don't totally go our own way and say, this is the European way. So that was my area of regulation. Now, I mean, I could give you many examples, so maybe you can ask follow-up question, but waste policies is an interesting one. Now, last week, the European Commission launched this package on making sustainable products the norm. It's about a new eco-design directive. It's about changes to textiles, regulated textiles, construction products, stuff like that. And also some changes to consumer laws, so consumer have more information about warranties, lifetime. And there's going to be more package on right to repair coming up later this year. And that's good, but it won't resolve the waste problems that the waste law is blocking. So we also need to dig into the waste law and change it. Apart from this, of course, we have many other fields of law. It could be public procurement, make it easier to procure circular solutions. It could be industrial policy generally, how to promote, industrial symbiosis and stuff like that. That is a market that is not very mature, and it's often waste legislation is a barrier. Some countries in Europe have end of waste criteria, making it easier to recycle stuff. Some apply other principles, making it harder and so on. It's not a mature market. So we need to dig into all of this a little bit, I think, to go ahead, these different policies. And I can just finally say that we also need to look into new areas. So if you want to repair your piece of electronics here, companies also use patents, copyrights and stuff to stop it. So we also need to dig into new areas here in the digitalization part.
Yeah, definitely. I also think these new areas, as you call it, it's also very linked with the role of digitalization, Industry 4.0, for example. I'm thinking here about how life cycle assessments could facilitate this circular economy transition in Europe, or you think maybe other more than a life cycle assessment? Do you think in other kind of methodologies that could also be implemented and facilitated also by this digitalization or smart factories?
I mean, it's a big topic that we will know more about in the coming months when we see, but in this policy package that came last week from the European Commission, the digital product passports came in, right? And the idea there is both that you can track the product, but also that you can track actors in the product chains, like the facilities where you do things or the remanufacturer and stuff like that. And you will then legislate who in the chain can see what information about the product. When is it a trade secret, and when can you open up for the recyclers or others? So that is a clear aspect of digitalization that we think can be used even in other ways. Let's say a TV is used in Europe and get a second life in Africa, then maybe the money the producer pays into the producer responsibility fee could follow to Africa. So we give them money to set up formal recycling, for instance. So that is one development, being able to track the products, but also actors in the product chain. That is come out so far, you know. And then there's of course all the speculation, you know, everything from artificial intelligence to the I'm forgetting the word now, but the ledgers and, you know,
machine learning and all those.
Yeah, and I mean tracking the product, etc. So the opportunities are big. Now I'm a little bit of a pessimist myself, because there's many good applications, but you know, AI, for instance, AI could also be the big energy thief of the future. If companies just pump up AI to gather data, we need more energy in the grid. So it's important that we maybe reserve such stuff for the good applications, and not for Facebook, who already knows so much about you, to collect even more data about where you are and where you go on vacation, you know, and how you could possibly be influenced to buy something in the future, you know. So I'm, you know, I'm a lawyer myself, so a lot of this is science fiction. So it's important to say, yes, we can use digitalization for good stuff, to track this stuff, to track what's in the product, to track where it's going, to force producers to show the data. When did it break down? You know, what happened to this product? Like, you can use this for something good, to show our product last 5 years and ours last 7 years, you know. But it's also a risk that you collect a lot of data that is not used, or AI requires more energy or whatever. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think also digitalization, of course, is a big driver for sharing economy, stuff like that. So of course there's a big potential to do things.
Yeah, I'm pretty agree with you. I also think that this trend of digitalization and Industry 4 or even 5.0 have a huge potential, but we also need to regulate, to have strong policies around that could help us to get the best out of this. So it's not only by itself the technology that can change or makes circular or sustainable our economy. We need to ask the right questions and try to drive the entire system into the right direction. So I think we are coming to an end. Carl, thank you so much for giving us the time to make this interview and answer these really relevant and insightful topics. I'm really happy to have you here, and we will be in touch. Keep you seeing you soon, I hope. So
Thanks for the invitation.
so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.